This, that through many toils I've won. Enough, why should I make it known? By folk with lust and hate consumed. Not this the truth that can be grasped against the stream of common thought. Deep, subtle, difficult, delicate. Unseen it will be by passion's slaves, cloaked in the murk of ignorance. This poem, by the Buddha himself, expresses his quite harsh opinion on the common people. He exclaims that they are consumed by hate and lust, and that they will never understand his teaching. In the poem, the Buddha seems quite isolated, misunderstood, or even lonely. Loneliness is generally seen as a negative and often painful state. Many people express that with it comes a feeling of emptiness, a certain hollowness, as if a part of a lonely person's soul were missing. We humans have evolved to live in groups for thousands of years, as there are many merits of being around others, like easier access to food, shelter, and physical and emotional support. But on the other hand, many great minds in the history of mankind are described as loners, or even antisocial. One of such personas is the enlightened one, Siddhartha Gautama. He is notorious for his many years-long training, which in the end helped him achieve the state of supreme perfect enlightenment. But a fact that is often overlooked is that for the majority of his journey, the Buddha was alone. He considered it the key to finding the meaning of life and a very powerful kind of spiritual practice. He himself retired into solitude whenever he had opportunities for it. This was not, of course, merely indulging in contemplation or in making the world reflect in the mirror of consciousness. It was a kind of spiritual training, even for himself and even after enlightenment. Gautama instructed his disciples in the same way. My disciples are instructed to sit in solitude quietly and to be earnestly meditating on the path. If they had something meritorious, let them conceal it, but if they had faults, let them confess. The ground for the reinforcement of loneliness by the Buddha is to be found in the fundamental reason of why the world exists in the first place, and that is the will. In many Buddhist texts, we can find mentions of something called the will. For we do not live in the intellect, but in the will. For the will is more fundamental than the intellect, and makes up the ultimate principle of life. This region of darkness, however, gives up its secrets when attacked by the will, by the force of one's entire personality. These quotes by a Zen scholar, D.T. Suzuki, express the Buddhist notion that something called the will is the first principle of being human, and also that this will is one's entire personality. This will is also stated to be the reason for the Buddha's enlightenment. But Gautama had an indomitable will. He wanted, with the utmost efforts of his will, to get into the very truth of the matter. He knocked and knocked until the doors of ignorance gave way, and they burst open to a new vista, never before presented to his intellectual vision. The will is the core of being a human, the sole reason for Buddha's enlightenment. It is the entire force of an individual's body, mind, and personality. According to the Buddha, if one is to achieve enlightenment, the only way to do it is quote-unquote attacking one's earthly ego with the full force of the will. In the beginning, which is really no beginning, and which has no spiritual meaning except in our finite life, the will wants to know itself, and consciousness is awakened, and with the awakening of consciousness, the will is split in two. In the spiritual beginning of human life, there is the will, and the sole purpose of that will is to know itself. Thus, it created consciousness to help itself achieve that goal. But by creating consciousness, the will limits itself, and now it can only perceive what it is conscious of. The goal of Buddhism is to return the will to its natural state, get the will to know itself, while retaining the consciousness that all of us humans have, and without which living life is not possible. The struggle and constant journey to getting to know oneself closely resembles what we all go through in our daily lives. Our whole lives, everything that we do, what we call the search for happiness, is at its core the will's search for itself. You may ask, okay, but what does the will have to do with loneliness? Well, loneliness is the key to making the will know itself. The will is the primary thing that constitutes life as we know it. When the will gets to know itself, the person also gets to know themselves, which is exactly what enlightenment is. Enlightenment is the work of prajna, which is born of the will, which wants to see itself and to be in itself. Hence, the Buddha's emphasis on the importance of personal experience. Hence, his insistence on meditation in solitude as the means of leading to the experience. The Buddha insisted on meditation in solitude because at the core, the will wants to see itself and be in itself. Since the beginning, the will, which is the central fact of life, has only one goal, which is to get to know itself. To me, it points to the notion that at the end of the day, as humans, we are all alone. Nobody can ever truly understand what we go through. Even on our deathbed, all that we truly have are our own thoughts. Enlightenment too is an individual's and not a group's spiritual realization, and that's how it's supposed to be. The way that we perceive the world is through our own senses, through our own experiences, which are born out of the will. Earlier, I mentioned how the Buddha treated meditating in solitude as a very powerful spiritual exercise. Through that exercise, the will and the mind are trained to get closer and closer to the state of enlightenment. Ignorance is thus not to be got rid of by metaphysical means, but by the struggle of the will. The struggle of the will is, in other words, the spiritual practice and turmoil that every human being needs to go through to become a Buddha. Existing in solitude is very painful and difficult, but it is the only way to get to know oneself. It is the only way to get the will to know itself. Once the will gets to comprehend its own nature, the state of enlightenment is achieved. An entirely new perspective on life unveils oneself before one. One's mind is full of peace, and one realizes that all they ever needed was not to find their place in the outside world, but to get to know their own true nature on the inside. Solitude is a needed element in the search for oneself. If one constantly runs away from it, it is like running away from oneself. Unfortunately, nowadays we have what can be called fake solitude. What I mean by that is the fact that we can distract ourselves from feeling lonely really easily. Anytime we feel the pain of loneliness, we can simply play a video game or spend time on social media, which makes the suffering go away even for a moment. But the key is to be able to simply sit with one's suffering and not run away from it. That pain we feel when alone is exactly what's needed to get to know our true nature, to get to feel our true emotions, and to learn to understand and take care of ourselves. Oftentimes, that line of thinking may lead to criticism from the outside world. As Gautama is always found alone, sitting in an empty room, he has lost his wisdom. Even Sariputra, who is the wisest and best disciple of his, is like a baby, so stupid and without eloquence. As you can see, even the Buddha had some words of criticism thrown at him for his solitude. But true enlightenment is, in other words, getting to know yourself. So it is only natural that the process of exploring your own psyche and personality is supposed to be a journey which can only be took up on your own. If one is to follow the path of solitude, one at first seems to lose some of the things that life offers. And I agree, simply existing by yourself can hardly be called living your life. But listen to this quote. That does he know, and he knows also other things far beyond, far better than those speculations. And having that knowledge, he is not puffed up, and thus untarnished. He has, in his own heart, realized the way of escape from them, has understood, as really they are, the rising up and passing away of sensations, their sweet taste, their danger, how they cannot be relied on, and not grasping after any of those things men are eager for. He, the Tathagata, is quite set free. The point is not to run away from the world and try to escape everything that it offers. It is to understand that no matter what your life is like, no matter what sensations you experience or what you go through, all those are things that come from the outside and they are not to be perceived as final. The only thing that is final and in a sense real in this world is the way that we are on the inside, the state that our mind is in. Therefore, O monks, whatever of matter there is, whether of the past, of the future, or of the present time, whether internal or external, whether coarse or fine, mean or exalted, far or near, All matter is to be regarded as it really is in the light of perfect knowledge. Thus, this is not of me, this I am not, this is not myself. One who thus seeing the world turns away from the world, is truly freed from evil passions, and has the consciousness of freedom. Such is called one who has the obstacles removed, trenches filled, one who has destroyed, is free, one whose fight is over, who has laid down his burden, and is detached. Loneliness can be difficult, it can be incredibly painful, but through it can be found great knowledge and great peace. At the core, the goal of all human beings is to get to know themselves. Buddhism supports the belief that at the core, all people are individuals, and the only way to truly get to know oneself is to learn how to be with oneself. Loneliness is the best teacher of that practice, and it can help us truly understand why we feel the things we feel, why we desire the things we desire, and it may even prove to be the key to the highest achievement of a Buddhist life, which is supreme perfect enlightenment.